we're going to be visiting the headquarters of Reef Check Malaysia. We're going to be interviewing Julian Hyde, who is a top leader and the general manager at Reef Check. Let's go! Alright, so today we have Julian Hyde, who is one of the top leaders and the general manager of a very reputable organization, Reef Check Malaysia. So, hi Julian, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me today and to explain a little bit more about what Reef Check does and how reefs are really important in the whole ecosystem.
Okay, you're most welcome.
So, you've been with Reef Check for about 15 years, since 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So, could we know a little bit more about what made you decide to dedicate your time and your efforts to this?
I have to be honest, it was kind of accidental. I used to live on Pulau Tioman.
Mm-hmm.
I used to run a scuba diving centre there, and while I was living on the island, one of the early coordinators for Reef Check got in touch, asked us if we would like to learn more about what it was all about, and I agreed because I've always been interested in conservation, to some degree. So they came to the island, they showed us how Reef Check, the survey method works, and we tried to help them out. Nobody had enough money to do anything. And I happened to move back to KL in about 2006, 2007 to start up a new business with my wife. So simply because I was in KL and closer to these guys, it was easy to communicate than being on the island and trying to do it by phone. And so I worked out how I could help them, and I worked with them to raise some funds, the first funding that we got, and that was the start of it really. Somebody else was supposed to take over the management but decided not to, so I carried on doing it part-time back in 2007. And that just became more part-time and then full-time, and now I've been doing this for 15 over years.
I see.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It started just coincidentally.
Quite by accident, yeah.
I see. So could you tell us a little bit more about the teams that you have? I believe there's 5 islands that Reef Check is involved in.
Well, we have 5 field offices.
Okay.
So our first one was in Pulau Tioman.
Okay.
Then we started working in Pulau Mantanani in Sabah.
Okay.
Then we moved back to Peninsula and opened an office in Mersing to do some work in the Mersing Islands. And then Redang and Semporna have followed just in the last 6-12 months. So they're fairly recent. But that's the 5 locations we have. We also have a small office in KK where we run our Sabah program from.
I see. So what happens over there? Is it more community based, or is it more based on volunteers?
Well, everything we do involves communities and to a large extent volunteers.
Okay.
So you can't do conservation from an office in KL, like you just pointed out. You can't learn anything about the oceans from KL, right? And we worked out a long time ago that if we were going to make a meaningful difference in coral reef conservation and management, we had to be out in the field. So our first, I guess, experiment, our first try at this was in Tioman, mainly because we knew it the best. I'd lived there, we'd been working there on other projects since then, so we knew the island quite well. What has happened since we opened the office on Tioman, which was in about 2014, 2015, is that we have learned more about how to actually do coral reef conservation. Conservation isn't a thing you can do. Conservation is a result of other actions, right? If you imagine a coral reef in somewhere like Tioman, there's all sorts of things that are affecting it, like divers, physical impact with the reef, and snorkelers standing on the reef, anchors that people throw in their trash, pollution from sewage from the mainland or whatever. All of these things impact coral reefs. So to protect that coral reef or to conserve it, there's lots of different words can be used, but to keep it in good condition, you need to either reduce or eliminate all of those impacts, right? And the net result of doing that is conservation. The reef will be conserved. Okay, So what we do is we don't do conservation, because you can't do conservation, it's an outcome. So what we do is we work with local communities and other stakeholders like tourism operators. We work with the government agencies in charge, federal level and increasingly at state level, to look at what's going wrong with reefs and therefore what we can do to solve the problem. All right. So the work on Tierman is all about working with the local community to get them involved in conservation, because right now there isn't really a good way for local communities to get involved, because of the way the marine parks are set up. It's very much run from Putrajaya. So what we try to do is find ways to get them involved by training them, by giving them funding and access to tools and so on, so that they can then help with all of the activities that will help to reduce or eliminate those threats that I was talking about before. So there are some very direct physical threats, like you get nets, fishing nets, which are abandoned by fishing boats, can get tied up and wrapped around coral reefs, and so we go down, we take those out of the water. There are predators of corals called crown of thorns starfish, and it literally eats the coral. So when their numbers get out of control, they do a lot of damage, so we take those out. The team on Tierman does some coral restoration programs, so they're helping to the repair is not the right word, but where an area of reef has been damaged, you can do a little bit of rehabilitation. You can help it to recover. So that's what we're doing. So all of that is well established on Tierman, and what we're doing now is we are replicating that program. First of all, it was in Mantanani, then it was Mersing, and then Redang, and now also Simporna. So it's all very community based. We use volunteers to do our annual coral reef survey program. Right, so every year we go to all of these sites around Malaysia. We collect data on what's happening to the reefs, and then we use that data in identifying problems and then solutions to what's going on.
Volunteers are the ones involved in the survey.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. We do use volunteers a little bit during our programs, but the thing is, when you're doing something as specific as going onto the island and becoming integrated with the community, it takes a lot of time to build up trust. You don't just go onto the island and say, hey, we've got to do this, right? It's like, why should I do this? Why should I listen to you? Who are you and why are you here? So it's a lot of trust building. And involving volunteers in that is difficult because, overseas volunteers, they don't have the language skills. Local volunteers only have very short amount of time, just over the weekend. Whereas what we're engaged in is transformational change that takes years sometimes. So volunteers are great for helping with the survey program. But that is, other than that, they do little programs on islands, like when we need to, we've been working on waste management, for example. So we need to build waste stations in the village or near the village. So the volunteers can help with that sort of small scale construction. But the main volunteer program we have, it's the survey program.
I see. So the long-term effort of what Reef Check is trying to do relies on the people that stay near to where the damage is happening.
It's the local communities, because if you imagine an island like Tierman or Redang or Perhentian or wherever it is, the local people are either fishing, right, so they're using the reef as a source of food, or they're working in tourism, so they're using the reef as a source of jobs. So either way, their whole livelihood depends on healthy coral reefs, right? If there's no coral reefs, then there won't be any tourists, and if there's no coral reefs, then there won't be any fish. So it's the local communities who are most affected by reef health and changes in reef health. So if the reefs are declining, the locals are going to suffer. So they are our key stakeholder, key target stakeholder.
For the knowledge of everyone watching and also for myself, could you explain a little bit more about what are coral reefs and why are they important?
The 4 key questions: what are reefs, why are they important, what's going wrong, and what can we do about it?
Yes.
So what are coral reefs? They are let's call them the rainforests of the sea. Okay, a coral reef is like a rainforest. It's easier to use rainforests as an analogy because most people are familiar with trees, right? We've all seen trees. You look out the window, you can see trees. For most people, coral reefs are an invisible ecosystem because most people don't get a chance to go to the islands. Most people don't get to go diving and snorkeling in places like Tiernan. So they've no real idea of what a reef is. But a reef is just an ecosystem, like a forest. It's got lots of different species, right? It's got lots of different habitats. And in those different habitats live lots of different creatures, right? So if you imagine a forest will have trees with branches, trees with holes in them, big trees, little trees, shrubs, bushes, and different animals live in these different little locations, niches, right? So it's the same with the reef. The coral reef itself is created by the coral animal, and most people don't know coral is an animal. It's not a plant, it's not a rock, it is an actual animal. And the animal grows when it produces the hard structure of the reef, which is made out of calcium carbonate, which it takes out of the seawater. Okay, so the coral animal creates this hard structure that is the reef, and because you have different species of coral, just like you have different species of tree, right? They all have different shapes and sizes and forms, and so that three-dimensional structure kind of grows up and it creates lots of niches and habitats and hiding grounds and holes and places where different creatures can live. So the reef, the solid reef structure itself then is inhabited by fish that live either just above the reef or maybe inside the reef. You've got shrimps and prawns and crabs, they live in the reef. You've got cucumbers that live between the reef areas. So the reef really is, it's a complex ecosystem with lots and lots and lots of diversity. I won't bother with numbers. There are something like 680 species of corals worldwide, and here in Malaysia in the Coral Triangle we have something like 550 of them. So 80% of corals worldwide. Similar with fish populations. So there's just this mind-boggling number of different species: big ones, little ones, colourful ones, dangerous ones. There's all sorts of stuff on the coral reef.
I see, and they're important because without them, the fish would have no place to stay, no place to lay their eggs, no place to essentially live.
I guess, people tend to think of them in their importance to us, right? What do they bring us? Food, fish, right? Prawns, shrimps, lobsters, they all live on reefs. So let's deal with bigger picture. Ecologically, yes. If you think in terms of the natural world and ecosystems in this bigger picture, then reefs are a breeding ground or a feeding ground for like a third of marine species. So if the reef itself wasn't there, not only would you lose the variety of species of corals, right? And we need to talk about biodiversity and the diversity of living things, which makes life what it is. But you'd lose the corals, but also then, if there's no physical reef structure, then you lose the living space for all of the fishes and invertebrates and so on that live inside the coral. So as far as we're concerned, what we lose mainly is a source of food, because there is no breeding ground or feeding ground for fish that we eat. There's fish that we fish on the coral reef itself, but there are also fish which breed on the reef, and when they mature, they leave the reef and they move into deeper waters, and that's where they become prey for the bigger fish, for tuna, for example. So it's not only reef fish that we're looking at, it's the bigger stocks of tuna or other big fish, pelagic fish, which are feeding on fish that originally came from the reef. So there's two different types of fishery. So it's important to us from the perspective of diet, food security, employment in coastal communities, but also don't forget the tourism aspect is very important. Tourism is a very big employer in Malaysia. It's 25% of employment, and a lot of tourists to Malaysia. Why do they come here? A lot of them go visit the islands. What do they do when they go there? They go diving or snorkeling on the reefs. So would they come if there was no reefs? I don't know. Some of them wouldn't. So it would have a direct economic impact. So they're important for those reasons. We tend to be quite selfish and think about how it's us that benefits, but there is the natural living world as well. You would lose a source of biodiversity, which is just an intrinsic part of the whole globe, and it's biodiversity.
You mentioned tourism being one of them. Would tourism also be one of the reasons that reefs are not surviving, they're being broken?
Yes, we are loving them to death. People love to go diving and love to go snorkeling. Unfortunately, tourism is a big impact to reefs. Imagine yourself taking a trip to, again, I'll use Tierman as the example. So you have to get there, right? So you've got to take a bus to Mersing. That's using fossil fuels, that's CO2 emissions. You've got to take a boat out to the island, same one, CO2 emissions. When you get to the island, you've got to stay somewhere, right? So somebody has cut down part of the natural rainforest on the reef to build a resort for you to stay in, not to mention importing all of the materials, the construction materials. While you're there, you are going to eat some food. What happens to your trash? How did the food get there, right? You're going to involve yourself in activities. You're going to go do some diving or snorkeling. So you've got pollution from the boat engine, you've got physical impacts from you or other snorkelers or divers or anchors and so on. You've got trash issues, sewage treatment, part of the problem. So the fact that you're going to the island brings all of those impacts. So how do we remove those impacts? You can't go to the island, all right? But of course, we can't just get rid of tourism like that. It's not practical. It's an important part of the economy. So tourism has an impact, but I think we need to look more carefully at how many tourists are coming, and we need to look at how we are managing tourism itself. You know, manage the numbers, but also what are you allowed to do on the island? Well, yes, you can go snorkeling and diving, but while you are snorkeling and diving, you're not supposed to damage the reef. You're not supposed to take corals away. You're not supposed to collect shells. You're not supposed to fish, even though people do these things. So I think we need to look at making sure that tourism is sustainable while we're still getting the economic benefits from tourism itself.
Right. I think sustainable tourism would be a really good answer to the problem, but it may not be as easy to implement, especially...
First thing you have to do is decide on a definition of sustainable tourism. I was in a workshop literally at the weekend talking about ecotourism, and one of the questions that we kept coming back to in the panel was, so what exactly is ecotourism, right? And there are several accepted definitions of ecotourism, but it's too easy to poke holes in it. So I'd rather think in terms of sustainable tourism. Yeah, it's easier to manage it and measure it, and I think we need to look at how can we make tourism more sustainable. You know, sustainability means it means providing for our own needs now, but ensuring the future generations can also provide for their needs, right? So again, let's look at Tierman. So we go and cut down all the trees on Tierman and make sure that there's plenty of resorts for tourists so we can bring more tourists, okay? Is that sustainable? No, because we're actually destroying the infrastructure, the ecosystems for our use, but also for future generations. Okay, so what do? Well, we limit the number of resorts so that we're cutting down the trees, destroying the terrestrial ecosystems. We're also limiting the number of people allowed to go in the water at any time or to any particular site, so that we're reducing the physical damage that they can cause. So if we don't damage those ecosystems today, but we're still making our own livelihoods, we're still catching enough fish, then if we're operating sustainably, then they will be there in the future as well. So it's getting the balance right between economic exploitation, economic development, and use of the ecosystem so that it's still around in 10, 20, 50 years.
Right.
Yeah. So sustainable tourism is something that I think we need to look at much more carefully in Malaysia.
Right. And ecotourism doesn't mean the same thing.
Like I said, I don't want to get involved in semantics, but it is quite easy to get tied up because what is ecotourism? Ecotourism is traveling to natural areas to enjoy and appreciate those areas and not leaving behind too many impacts.
Okay.
That's the same thing as sustainable tourism.
Yeah.
So I don't think the debate of what each of them actually means, and I think it's important. I think what's important is that we're aware that tourism has impacts, and we need to manage and control those impacts. You can call it ecotourism, you can call it sustainable tourism, People talk about tourism stewardship now. You know, that's another way of describing the same thing, really. It's making sure that your stewardship of a natural area is strong enough and good enough so that you don't do too much damage.
Right.
So it's that ecotourism, sustainable tourism, stewardship.
Essentially the same outcome.
Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Same outcome, yeah.
I see, alright. And I watched your interview last year with It Matters, and you mentioned that there are local impacts as well as global impacts, and I really liked that part of the interview, and I was wondering if you could share it here today.
All of the things I've been talking about, really, the tourist impacts, waste, sewage, tourism and so on, those are what we call local impacts. They happen very locally, all right? So if you go to Tierman, you could pollute the water with trash, you could damage the coral reef physically, you could, all of those things, they happen locally. And as coral reef managers, the Marine Parks Agency, they are the local management agency, they can do something about all of those things, right? They can improve the waste management, the sewage treatment, they can insist on limiting numbers of tourists, they can restrict resort development, all very local to the island. So that's one set of impacts. There's this other set of impacts, which we call the global impacts, which is essentially driven by carbon, CO2. We're getting ocean warming, global warming, climate change. We're also seeing ocean acidification, which is as more CO2 is absorbed into the ocean, it gets more acid, so that affects corals and shrimps and crabs and all of these creatures that create their own skeleton from calcium carbonate in the water. That's changing the chemistry of the ocean, changing their ability to build their own shell, right? We have soft skins, crabs have hard skins, and it's created out of calcium carbonate in some examples. Those big impacts are essentially caused by burning fossil fuels. Right? We all know the argument, burning fossil fuels creates global warming, then the oceans start to warm, corals get stressed, they start to die, ocean gets more acidic, creatures and organisms living in the ocean can no longer survive. Yeah. The problem is that as a local manager, we can't do anything about that. Right? I can't stop carbon emissions. Right? I can't tell everybody you can't drive your car anymore, and you can't fly airplanes, and no more electricity. Oops, right? That's not going to happen. Those are problems that need to be fixed on a government-to-government, international level, right? And it's kind of happening slowly. I don't know if it's happening fast enough, but some steps are being taken. So we can't do anything about those. Now, right now, you've heard about the El Nino, La Nina weather pattern. Changes all the time. We're having very warm weather at the moment. Okay. Right now, the ocean around Southeast Asia is very warm compared to normal. Right? If you go to Tierman, normal times, the temperature is about 28 degrees centigrade. Right? It's a little cooler early in the year, a little bit higher in the middle of the year. It's average about 28 degrees. And corals are very tightly adapted to a very narrow temperature range. So corals like it in this area, corals like it in between 27 and 29 degrees. Okay. If the temperature rises 1 or 2 degrees, they're not happy, right? And if it rises further than that, they're even unhappy, right? What happens is when the water warms, corals normally have microscopic algae living inside their tissues, right? Basically small plants, right? Algae plants. And that's what gives the coral its colour. So all the greens, browns and pinks, it's not the coral itself, it's the algae living inside them. All right? So when the coral gets stressed, it expels the algae into the water around it, right? Which leaves the coral animal, just a transparent layer over the skeleton that it creates. It's like, imagine my skin being transparent, right? You'd see what was underneath, which is my bones, right? So when the coral gets bleached, loses the colour, loses the algae, and what you see then revealed is the white calcium carbonate skeleton, right? And that's what we call bleached coral, because it looks bleached, everything looks white, right? So if the water is warm enough for long enough, the corals will show this, they'll exhibit this stress reaction. The algae will get pushed out into the water. Okay, the coral is stressed now because the algae is its main food source. So it's like it's living on a starvation diet. Right? Now it can survive for a certain amount of time like that, but eventually coral's going to start to die. Okay, if the temperature cools down, then the stress is over. The algae get attracted back into the coral. It gets its colour back. More importantly, it gets its food source back, and it will survive. So, global warming, which is causing the warm water and all of these climate change and weather changes we're saying, that's a global impact. There's nothing I can do about that. But if you imagine that having an impact on corals on a local level, right? So you've got corals now, they're all stressed, they're losing their algae, they've lost their food source, they're not very healthy. What we can do on a local level is remove all of those other threats and pressures and impacts so that the reefs are left alone, right? So they are as healthy as possible. So we sort out the waste management problem, there's no more trash. We solve the sewage pollution problem, so there's no more pollution. We solve the physical impacts from divers, so there's no more physical impacts. So we're basically just leaving the reefs alone, just leave them be, they'll be happy, they'll be okay. And so they're much more, we call it resilience, it's a characteristic of ecosystems called resilience. And basically it means that they are better able to survive these big external impacts because they are essentially just healthier, right? Think of two people, right? Me, old, smokes, drinks too much, bad diet, not enough exercise, not very resilient. You, young, attractive, healthy, active, all of that, right? Very resilient. So something comes on, like COVID, okay? Who's it more likely to knock over? Me, the unresilient character, or you, the resilient character? It's going to knock me over, right? Because I'm not resilient. So you can apply that same idea to coral reefs. Say a resilient reef, an external threat comes along and it's like, no, I'm healthy and I've got a good diet and I'm fine, thank you, go away. Okay. So that's how resilience works. It's a very simple explanation, but that's the difference between the local threats and the big threats, global threats. Nothing we can do about the global threats. What we can do is make sure that reefs are well managed and local impacts are managed and reduced or eliminated so that reefs are more likely to survive these big shocks from outside.
It's really amazing. I didn't know that reefs could react differently to the threats that
all ecosystems do. All organisms do. If we react to our local environment. You know, some people can deal with the heat better than others, right? Some animals can. My dogs hate the heat. They're like hot. I'm like, I'll just I'll put on a thin t-shirt or I'll put the aircon on. The dogs like that. But we're all able to cope with these changes in our environment to different degrees. It's just that we don't talk about coral reefs. Remember the invisible ecosystem.
Right.
Nobody ever sees coral reefs. Nobody understands what they are, what they do for us, how they work. What affects them. So one of the things that we need to do is much more work on raising awareness about these issues.
Is there anything that, especially people who do not stay by the ocean or on the islands, is there anything that we can do over here from KL or even from our own homes that would, perhaps it would be the global impact side of it that would be more relevant? Exactly.
If you're not going to the islands, right, then you are not part of that problem that's creating all of those local impacts, right? So if you don't visit Tierman, you can hold your hand up and say, I'm not having any impact on Tierman, right? It's not my fault. However, if you are using more energy than you need to, then you're creating more CO2 than you need to. If you're using more water than you need to, right, you're wasting that resource. If you're taking more food than you need, you're wasting that resource, right? So I think the message to the general public is whatever you do has an impact on the natural world. It doesn't have to be coral reefs, it can be rainforests, right? It can be rivers, it can be streams. Look at the amount of trash in the rivers, right? That's people doing that. The rivers don't do it to themselves. It's all man-made trash. You can have an impact by thinking about your habits, your lifestyle, and thinking about how that is impacting the natural world and how you can reduce that. And if we all did our little bit, right, we make a big difference. Here's an example I like to use. When you're brushing your teeth in the morning, do you leave the water running or do you switch the tap off?
Switch it off.
Okay. Not many people do. When I ask this question in a room, most people say, I'll leave the tap on. Well, it's just water. Okay. While you're brushing your teeth, there's going to be 2-3 litres of water going down the pipe, right?
Right.
That water has to be collected, right? It has to be stored, and it has to be transported to you. All of which involves cost, infrastructure, energy, pumps, chemicals, cleaning, right? Once you finish with it, it's taken away and it's treated, it's cleaned, and it's disposed of. All of which has costs: chemicals, manpower, energy, infrastructure. All right, and you've got this resource which is being, all of that cost is stored in that water that's delivered to you, right? And you just let it go down the drain and out wherever it's going, unused,
Yes.
right? Despite all of the costs associated with doing that. So if we all save a little bit of water, right, it cuts down our own home bills, which is negligible anyway, but it's there. But imagine 30 million people in Malaysia, each wasting a litre of water each time they brush their teeth, twice a day. 60 million litres a day. That's a lot of water, right? Now multiply that by the population of the globe. It's an awful lot of water. And yet we have droughts. Why? When we're just pouring water down the drain, it's crazy. So we can do that. We can switch lights off. Oh, it's just one light. Yes, but if 30 million people do it, it makes a big difference. And you'll see when the weather gets hotter and hotter, more and more people will use more and more aircon. Do we have enough generating capacity to supply everybody's needs for 24-hour aircon? Or should we think about maybe that empty room, we can switch the aircon off? So we all have these impacts, and I think everybody needs to be more aware of it, more thoughtful, more considerate. Right? Somebody comes into your house, you want them putting their feet upon the chair and making it all dirty and damaging your furniture, or would you like them to come and treat your home with respect? Well, all I'm asking is that you treat your home, your bigger home, the environment, with a bit of respect.
And I think it really comes down to awareness as well, because when we're brushing our teeth, not a lot of people think about
looking out the window, what's the weather like today? Oh, there's the neighbour's dog. It's just the way we were brought up. It's just what we see on TV. It's the messages we get about consumerism. It's like, just don't be that person. Be a thoughtful person.
And for me personally, the reason I said I don't let it run is because of my mom. She would come and check since young, and my dad is like, why is the light on in the room? No one's in the room. So we have that kind of mindset.
We just need more people to do the same.
And I think it's a lot of awareness that especially the younger generation, sometimes we take it for granted. We don't tend to think about it so much. And nowadays there are people not even appreciating the greenery, the streams, the rivers. So that's something that I think needs to be worked on as well.
That's a bigger philosophical question. How we are losing our connection with nature, and because we're losing it, we don't understand how important it is. Like, ask kids these days, where does chicken come from? From the supermarket, right? No. So we need to get them out. When I was a kid, we used to go holidays. Family holidays would be spent somewhere in the countryside near a farm, right? Like as not, we'd end up on the farm playing with the farm animals, helping the farmer out, do little bits of stuff. I know where milk comes from. I milked a cow. Right? How many people these days have done that?
Right.
So you lose the connection. If you lose the connection, you don't care about it anymore.
Right.
And that's a problem.
And even though there's so many conversations going on about these things, I find that there are still people that say the environment will sort itself out. Nature knows how to work around these things. And do you have anything to say to people who have that kind of mindset?
Yeah, I do. Nate, they're absolutely right. People say we should save the planet, right? No, the planet's going to be fine. We're the problem. And what nature will do is work a way around us, because we are. And I'm not saying this is deliberate. I'm not on about the Gaia theory that the Earth is a living thing. But if we continue to use too many resources, then we will simply run out of resources, and we will simply have no food. We will have no power because we've used it all. There's too many of us. There's too many of us using too much stuff. So it's like, nature will find a way around us, and nature will survive. And you only have to look at an abandoned building that's been empty for 6 months, 12 months, and see how nature recovers, right? How fast the trees come back and the branch and it gets covered in greenery. Nature's going to be fine. It's us that's the problem.
Right. So if we do not do something soon enough, we are going to be the one that's on the losing end if we continue to take and take and take.
Yep. It's not the Earth doing it to us deliberately. It's just us. We're what's the word I was going to use? We're abusing the resources that the world provides for us. Oil and gas, fresh water, we're abusing it, we're polluting it, we're overusing it, we just, and eventually it'll just run out, and then we won't know what to do.
Right. That's very true. Thank you so much for all the knowledge and the wisdom on this topic, because I think that the public really needs to know a little bit more about this, whether it comes from me or another source, because sometimes we don't see it. And as you said, coral reefs are in the sea. They are not like trees.
Yeah.
Like we look out our windows, we see trees, and we can feel for the trees whenever a tree is being chopped down, but we don't see coral reefs. Even I today learned so many things about where the coral gets its color from, and how when it's going to die it loses its color and things like that.
When stressed, loses the colour, it dies later on if it's not if it doesn't recover before that.
Yeah, and I hope to be a platform that can also spread this message. And are there any programs that are currently running or going to be started soon that anybody can join or volunteer for at Reef Check?
The biggest problem we have is that our main volunteer program is the annual survey program, and you have to be an experienced diver.
Oh, I see.
So some of our work is a little bit technical in nature, so it's not easy for us to use volunteers. It's like we don't have jobs in the office that people can come and help with. So we do struggle with engaging with volunteers. We'd like to do more of it, but it's just that, well, what can I do? Well, there's the volunteer program, there's the survey program. Well, I'm not a diver. I can't help you. We are the manager. That's not the right word. We run the international coastal cleanup effort in KL every year. That's an international thing. Started nearly 40 years ago in the US, and we now run that every year. So third weekend in September is International Coastal Cleanup Day, and we encourage people to join the effort. Last year we had about 11,000 people all around Malaysia. So go out to your local beach, bring a bag, pick up the trash, log the data in the app, which you can download from the website, and then helps us to collect data on what trash is there, and that helps us to understand where it's coming from and what we can do about it. And a lot of it is there, it floats ashore from somewhere else, but it's trash left by beachgoers. I mean, you go to a beach, right? Beautiful place. You want to go and spend a day in this lovely environment. What do? You leave all your trash behind. It's like, what? Anyway, so those are the two main volunteer programs. And apart from that, all our work is on the islands, right? And I think I said earlier on, you need to understand the locals. You need to have a good understanding, a good relationship with them. So it's difficult to get people involved in those programs because there's not really much they can do.
It's long-term.
But either the diving program, the survey program, if you're a diver, and if you're not, then consider joining the International Coastal Cleanup Day.
I see. And the International Coastal Cleanup can be done from wherever people are. They just have to find a beach and download the app. It's not that they have to gather.
No. You do. One person can do a beach cleanup. We encourage, a lot of companies take part, so you get 10, 20, 30, 40 people from the company. We'll get more, sometimes big groups, or it can just be a group of friends, right? A couple of mates, just go down the beach, pick up the trash. It's not complicated. It's definitely not rocket science, that one.
Thank you so much for all the information.
You're welcome.
And if anyone wants to know more about Reef Check, you can visit their website at www.reefcheck.org.my. Thank you, Julian.
You're welcome.